Thank you for listening to this episode of History Exchange.
Danke, dass Sie wieder dabei sind bei dieser Episode von History Exchange.
Further information can be found on Center Austria's homepage www.centeraustria.org.
Und auf der Homepage des Instituts für Zeitgeschichte der Universität Innsbruck www.uibk.ac.at/Zeitgeschichte.
Welcome to today's episode of History Exchange. I am Andrea Klingler and today is November 29 and I am in the University in Innsbruck. Our guest today is Dr. Hans Petschar. Dr. Hans Petschar is the Director of the Image Archive and Graphic Collection at the Austrian National Library. He is historian, primarily focused on contemporary and Austrian history. And Dr. Petschar has received, among other honors, the Austrian Cross of Honor for Science and Art. And today we interview him regarding his specialized knowledge on the post-war period, and we also want to inquire about how his work as a historian has evolved over time. We welcome Dr. Petschar, who is joining us today from Vienna. Hello.
Hello, thank you for having me. Thank you for the kind invitation.
Before we delve into today's topic, I would like to pose on an intercultural question to you, arising from our collaboration with the University of New Orleans. So, the first question, what is the first image that comes to your mind when you think about the United States?
Well, actually, there are two images. The first one, when I came for the first time to the United States on a plane, and when the plane went down to JFK Airport in 1982. So this was really very impressive for me. And the second is 1999, standing on the rooftop of the World Trade Center together with my wife and the then Director General of the Austrian National Library, Hans Martin, looking down to the streets of New York.
Okay, thank you for that interesting answer. Let's go on to the next few questions. We now want to explore the connection you have with Günther Bischof and the Center Austria. So the first question about this is, when and how did you first meet Günther Bischof?
Well, I knew Günther as a contemporary historian and as the editor-in-chief of the Contemporary Austrian Studies in New Orleans since the early years 2000 onwards. And he used to order photographs from our archives over the years, and I tried to help him out as much as I could. He had very specific questions all the time, and so I think he was quite happy that we could send him over most of the image requests that he had or help him to doing visual research. And then this was around 2005 when I published a book on Austria 1945 to 1955 and curated an exhibition at the Austrian National Library called the Young Republic when we met personally. So this exhibit and the book was largely based on photographs of the pictorial section of the United States Information Services in Austria. Günther was very much interested in this collection, and he invited me to publish an article in his book series, and also to give a lecture at the University of New Orleans. So this was around 2007 and 2008, and when I came for the first time to New Orleans, and this was really my first encounter with Deep South in the United States. Very, very different from what I knew before. I had studied history and German literature in Salzburg, and I had a roommate in Salzburg, an exchange student from the United States, and he invited me to come to Boston and Massachusetts and Cape Cod in the early 1980s, and this was totally different from what I experienced then in Louisiana. I didn't understand a word when I was listening to the people down there, especially to the Black Americans. But over time, you get used to the dialect, and you can follow. And over the years, I then came frequently to New Orleans in 2010, 2011, always to the University of New Orleans. And in 2014, we had the centenary of the first outbreak of the First World War. And Günther published a book on this topic, and I contributed with an essay on the war collection of the Austrian National Library, which had been established a few months after the outbreak of the war. The then director of the library, he was very ambitious in getting all print materials regarding to the First World War. And so then we had a nice collaboration on this book project. And then all of a sudden, Günther told me, well, that there is a Marshall Plan chair at the University of New Orleans. And it's always 1 year a historian, 1 year it's more in economy, and he told me that they are thinking of having a professorship on visual history and public history, and if I would be interested in applying for this chair. And then I asked him, well, Günther, if you can tell me what public history is, then maybe I can think about it. And then he said, well, that's exactly what you were doing at the National Library, doing research, but preparing the results and making them available for a general public, either in exhibit or in books that are aiming at a general public and not so much on scholars. Well, in the end, I found this more and more interesting, this idea. And then when then I applied for this professorship, and finally I got it. And then in 2015 and 16, the academic year, I spent almost a year in New Orleans and was teaching at UNO. So this was my first encounter with Günther. It still continues to the day.
Okay, thank you. That's an interesting story. How would you describe Günther Bischof as a historian?
Well, Günther is a first-class diplomatic historian, and I think he stuck to this from his beginnings until he died, or he continues to work, as we all know. But he was always very open to new trends in historical research. And I think the reason for this is not only his openness and his personality, but also his work as editor-in-chief of this contemporary Austrian studies. He got they always try to have a specific topic for each volume, and he wants to, and he really opened up historical research for new developments in also in this series of books, and also I think that he didn't miss any conference of the German Studies Association, and then later on the Austrian Studies Association in the United States, where he would be there for like 3 days, or following as much presentations as he could, taking memory notes, and so he knew basically really what everything was going on in historiography, especially related to Austrian American studies, but not only, or to contemporary history. So he has he's extremely well informed about not only the topics, but also knows all the scholars, and most of them personally, and obviously he's always very informed on the latest trends and also in primary and secondary literature. So this is what I would say. He's living for ages now in Louisiana, and he married a Cajun woman. I think they both studied together and in Harvard, but he never lost tracks to these roots in Austria. I think this is also very important for him.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. And now the last question relating to Günter Bischoff. What was the most interesting or enjoyable collaboration you had with him?
Well, most enjoyable was, of course, the year in New Orleans when we met daily at the history department at UNO. And in this year, I was teaching something completely different, but he was an expert on the Marshall Plan in Austria, and he said, well, there will be the 70 years anniversary of the Marshall Plan in 2017. Why don't we publish a book together? You do the visuals and I do the text, the texting. And so we had some discussions how to organize this book, how to do it, and finally, then when I came back to Vienna to the National Library, then we started the real thing, which was that, and this was really challenging. So I got the chapters or the text for each chapter by Günther. I did read them carefully, try to understand more about the Marshall Plan, and try to find some images or photos related to this text passages. Then I would send him photos, and then I or even tell him, well, for this topic there might be other photographs, so or there might be other. So you could slightly adjust your text, and then so this went back and forth, and also we had to do the book in German and in English at the same time, including the layout, and this was and we were really in a hurry, but because we had to finish it or publish it in 2017. And well, this was very challenging, but also very, very interesting. Not all, I think, for both of us, for Günther and for me. And I think he was quite surprised that which rich visual material we had in our collection, based on this collection of the United States Information Services, the archives of the Victorian section. So this was an exciting project, and I think the outcome also was worth the effort.
Thank you for answering the personal questions about Günter Bischoff. Now let's move forward and dive into your research topic. Specifically, we'll start with the newly opened exhibit, Yoichi Akamoto, Icon of Post-War Photography. And you even collaborated with Günter Bischoff on this. So on November 2022, you opened this new exhibit, which will be on display until March 3 from 2024 in the Prunksaal of the Austrian National Library. Please explain what the exhibit is about and what your contribution to this exhibition is.
Well, first of all, to understand better who was Yoichi Okamoto, he was a military photographer with Japanese descendants. His parents immigrated to the United States in 1904, and he was born in 1915. He was after his finishing his studies, he was working as a press photographer from 1939 onwards. And on 6th of January 1942, he became the first Nisei, which means a American with Japanese descendants to be accepted for the United States Army. So this was 1 month after Pearl Harbor. Very exceptional. And his mother and his brother were taken to an internment camp a few months later, and he became an officer in the U.S. Army. And in this function, he came to Europe in the spring of 1945 as a military photographer, and he then came to Salzburg, where he met General Mark Clark, the High Commissioner to Austria. And Clark hired him as his personal photographer. Clark was very, very important, obviously, for Austrian recovery after the war. Actually, by the way, Günther Bischoff, one of his first academic papers he wrote was about General Mark Clark. And Clark then moved the headquarters of the United States Army from Salzburg to Vienna in late summer 1945. Okamoto followed him and was the head of the Signal Corps photographers of the United States forces in Austria until 1948, and then from 1948 to 1954, he became the head of the photographic section of the United States Information Service in Austria. And we were able to acquire the personal photographic estate of Okamoto in 2019. And I flew into the United States, to South Carolina, where the son of Okamoto lived, and he showed me this estate, and then we immediately decided to buy it for the National Library because Okamoto was not only a very great communicator in Austria, but also a very, very talented photographer himself, and an art photographer. And so we bought this collection, which comprises about 20,000 negatives and 900 original prints. We digitized the complete collection, together with the collection of the United States Information Services, also about 20,000 photographs. And then we decided to have an exhibit specifically dedicated to the legacy of Yoichi Okamoto. And he left Austria in 1954. Then he was working for the United States Information Agency in Washington. And from 1963 to 1969, he became the personal White House photographer of Lyndon B. Johnson. And So he was really a very, very important figure, not only in Austria, but also in the United States. His archives of the Johnson years are preserved nowadays at the LBJ Library in Austin, Texas. And together with this library, with the LBJ Library, the Austrian National Library will also present an exhibit in the United States next year from March 2024 to July 2024 at the Austrian Embassy in Washington. And also in our exhibit here in Vienna, for the first time, we present Okamoto's photographs from the White House. So this is the reason why we have it. And also this exhibit is very much related to the research of Günter Bischof, and therefore we invited him to be the opening speaker of our exhibit in Vienna.
Thank you for the detailed and interesting explanation. I'd like to continue focusing on the exhibit now. In the catalog or accompanying book for the exhibit, you wrote an article about the life of Yoichi Okamoto. You repeatedly mention the challenge that initially the dating of Okamoto's press photographs is limited or non-existent. So, what problems and challenges did this pose for you as a historian?
Really? Yeah, well, this collection is very exceptional, and because it's a private archive, and it's a mixture of personal photographs, family photographs, political photographs, contemporary photographs, military photographs, and with almost no captions. So the original negatives, they are going back to when he really came to Europe from April, May 1945, and he continued to take photographs, also coming back to Vienna until the early 1980s. But then his son, who was born in Vienna in 1947, he preserved the collection, but did not dig very deep into it. And therefore, we had really the challenge to separate all this out and to compare his personal photographs with the, let's say, official photographs we had in our library, but also with the Signal Corps photographs preserved at the National Archives in Washington, and with the photographs the Mark Clark collection holds at the Citadel in South Carolina. Clark was the 11th president of the Citadel, and therefore they hold his personal archives. It is not unusual that institutions like ours, that they have visual sources with no or not enough metadata information. So it's part of the daily job of visual archivists to try to identify, to contextualize the visual sources. But this one is really very special because there were almost no captions, and I knew the collection of the photo section of the US Information Services in Austria quite well, and therefore I was able to identify many of them, and also digitization helps a lot. You know, if you digitize this complete collections and then you browse through the images, this is very helpful. Also, and more importantly, it is especially in this case, it's necessary to take a look at other collections or other institutions, like the National Archives in Washington, the Citadel Archives, the LPJ Library Archives. And only if you do this, then you're able to bring all this together. And therefore, collaboration and research is so important, especially for visual sources.
Wow, we are getting a good insight into the work of a historian here. Thank you very much. We would like to stay thematically in the post-war period and now discuss the Marshall Plan. Together with Günter Bischoff, you published the monograph Der Marshallplan seit 1947, die Rettung Europas und der Wiederaufbau Österreichs in 2017. And in the book, you discuss the lasting effects of the Marshall Plan still felt in Austria today. Please name some significant impacts that we still feel today. And from a historical perspective, please explain how it is possible that this plan still plays a role in Austria today.
Well, this is a set of complex questions. First of all, the most important impact of the Marshall Plan, and in plus what the Americans did in Austria from 1945 onwards is culture, popular culture, music, the American way of life, that is common for everybody, for elder and younger generations. I think also the Western orientation of Austria is a result of the Marshall Plan. The reason why the Marshall Plan is still alive is that it was, besides the public relations aspect, it was the most ingenious program of American diplomacy, at least in the 20th century, and the most successful program. And the idea was the Marshall Plan would help the American economy, but also would help the economy in the 16 member states of the Marshall Plan. All these countries got goods from the United States, machinery, etc., and for free. And these goods and machinery were sold on the Austrian or local markets all over Europe in the member states, and the money was then given to a fund, the European Recovery Program Fund, and this money is still there. So this fund still exists. The American government dedicated it to the Austrian state, and with this money to the day, innovative programs and the exchange of scholars and students are financed in Austria. This is not so well known any longer, and also I think we have to differentiate the elder generations and scholars. They know pretty well about the reconstruction of Austria, the American help. Younger generations maybe not. Either they don't know, or maybe also they are not so much interested in. We had a strong wave of pro-American feelings after the war, and starting, I would say, with the Korean War, and then especially with the Vietnam War, not talking about later wars. We have a strong wave, or had and still have a strong wave of anti-Americanism in Austria. So I think the memory on the Marshall Plan, but not only the Marshall Plan, but also of American help to Austria is kind of fading away, and it's still important to think about that, also to communicate and teach contemporary history, and also this aspect of contemporary history. And maybe last point, the Marshall Plan had two periods. The first one was really supplying food, helping to Austrians to recover, promote tourism, and also the industrialization of Austria. This would lasted until like from 48 to 1950 or so, and then with the Korean War, and especially what helped after the events in Czechoslovakia in 1948, and we see a phase of militarization of the Marshall Plan, which has been criticized a lot from contemporary historians. But if you look at what's going on now in the Ukraine and Soviet aggression against Ukraine, or this brutal attack of Hamas terrorists on Israel, then I think we have to think this over. And because we are entering in a new Cold War, and in a world that has dramatically changed, and so I think we should go back and study the early years of the Cold War and Marshall Plan from this perspective.
Very fascinating facts about the Marshall Plan. Thank you about that. We now want to go on with your work in the Austrian National Library. You have been the director of the Image Archive of the Austrian National Library since 2002, which is more than 20 years now. So what has changed in these 20 years regarding the archiving of cultural memory? We particularly think about the digitization and the advantages and disadvantages it brings to the image archive of the Austrian National Library.
Yeah. When I came to this department, the Picture Archives and Graphics Department of the Austrian National Library in 1998 as a deputy director. And my job at that time, these years until then, when I became the director, was to the modernization of the archive, digitization, planning the digitization, planning a renovation of our archive here. When I came to this department, there were no computers at all. People were cataloging with typewriters, and we're producing a card catalog with in the international card format. 1.4 million cards for approximately 1 million 1 million objects. Obviously no digitization at all. And we started on this. The first thing we did was to digitize the card catalog, because I said it makes absolutely no sense when we select a couple of photographs or graphics, digitize them, and then offer them, because researchers would have their own ideas or would need completely other objects. So I said, what we should do is we should digitize the card catalog, make it available, and let the people know we can provide you with a scan within 2 days. And this is what we did. And so we did build up a digital service, basically via phone or email. And then we started, then we had the big renovation project at the library. And we moved back. We had to remove the complete archives, the collections, the books, and then bring them back after the renovation, which was then finished in 2005 and 6, which we did. And then at the same time, we started a mass digitization project for collections that we could identify, like the collection of the United States Information Services. This is what we did. We completely digitized the portraits collection, approximately 200,000 historical portraits, made them available. And today we have more than 800,000 objects online, more than 1 million objects in our digital library online, not only photographs and graphics, but also posters. We have more than 600,000 books online available on Google Books, but also in our on our library catalogs and website. So this was a total revolution. We had, when we started in 2000, we had all the researchers either writing to us or coming to the archives, and now we have I would say 90% of our users we supply online and via our online collections. This is and obviously its research is much easier. It's much quicker. But we have only in our collection about 3 million objects. We have now digitized 800,000. It's very comfortable for editors, for publishers, for students. However, students, publishers, and even researchers tend to accept only what's already digitized and online. So, and we have much, much more. And also, digital objects are completely different from analog physical objects because you have only the image, no context. And it's very important to teach with physical sources, especially for historians, I think, but not only. It's very important to know what's the difference, to know the physical objects as well. And this is what we are going to do in the future, that we will come closer to universities, to students, to researchers, offering services, direct services in our departments with special collections and teaching how to work in a hybrid environment with physical and digital objects.
Thank you for the detailed response. That sounds truly interesting and is well comprehensible to me. Finally, I would like to ask you about your career as a historian. Please share an interesting, funny, instructive anecdote that happened to you in your career as a historian.
Yeah, well, I think I will share with you one of the experience that I had when I was teaching at UNO in 2014 and 2015 and 16. In the first semester, I was teaching about Habsburg history. I was at the same time preparing an exhibit in 2016 at the National Library on occasion of the 100 years centenary of the death of Emperor Francis Joseph. So this exhibit was almost finished, or the preparation when I went to New Orleans, and therefore I had a class there dedicated to the visuals, so the visual life of Emperor Francis Joseph. And the background is that we had graphics and photographs later from every year of his life. So means from 1830 to 1916, every year at least one portrait. And this is very exceptional. This is very uncommon, unusual for a personality of the 19th century. So I was teaching on the life of Emperor Francis Joseph and the Habsburg Emperor from 1830 to 1916. And there was one student who then, in his assignment paper, he gave me, really surprised me, not with what he did right, but with the title, because the title of this paper was EFJ. So why EFJ? He said, well, the first person in the state, you have John F. Kennedy, JFK. You have Lyndon Baines Johnson, LBJ. So why not AFJ? And I found this very funny, but also very interesting how history is perceived of a foreign country where they had no clue at all what it would be, Austria, the Austrian Empire, and how they tried to get familiar with that. And this was a very good story, I thought, and also how their evaluation or their vision of this, not only the country but also the emperor changed, because after the first years from 1830 to and then 1848 and so on, they were very skeptical. Said, well, this is an autocrat. He was dependent on the military in 1848, so they disapproved and said, and he was not democratic and so forth. And then he married this wonderful, beautiful woman. Then he had all these tragical events in his life, with his son committing suicide, the mother being murdered and stabbed to death, and then they started to love him. And then I said, well, you have to see both sides of the coins, not only hate or love. But this was what was very interesting story for me. I learned a lot how you perceive history.
Okay, that sounds funny. Thank you. We go back now to the intercultural collaboration with the USA. And like all the other interviewees, you answer the following question. What is your favorite food in the USA?
And this is a very easy answer. It's definitely the Louisiana seafood gumbo, accompanied with a nice glass of beer and New Orleans jazz.
That sounds delicious to me. Thank you. I'd like to briefly summarize our podcast. We've heard personal stories about Günter Bischoff, discussed the new exhibition at the Austrian National Library, and talked about your collaboration with Günter Bischoff on the Marshall Plan. Additionally, we were privileged to gain insight into your work as a historian at the Austrian National Library. And yes, I sincerely thank you, Dr. Petschar. Goodbye, thank you.
Danke fürs Dabeisein.
Thanks for listening. We hope you'll tune in to the next episode. More information can be found at Center Austria's website www.centeraustria.org.
Und auf der Homepage des Instituts für Zeitgeschichte der Universität Innsbruck www.uibk.ac.at/Zeitgeschichte.